The cold was a familiar enemy, but the ash was a new torment. It coated Ilara's tongue, a bitter grit that tasted of despair and endings. Each breath was a razor blade of smoke and icy air, scraping her lungs raw. The forest around her was a skeleton, black bones clawing at a sky bruised purple and orange by the distant dying flames. She was a ghost haunting a graveyard of trees, a creature of white against the soot-stained snow, as pale and unwanted as the first frost of a cursed winter. Her wolf, Lyra, was a fragile flicker within her, whimpering and weak. Lyra had always been small, her fur the same stark, unnatural white as Ilara's own hair, her eyes the color of diluted blood. A genetic flaw, an omen. That was what they had always called her, the cursed Omega, the pale death. Her own pack had whispered the names until they became the only truth she knew. A week. It had been a week since the final shattering, a week since Marcus, the beta she had been promised to since birth, had stood before the entire Blood Moon pack and rejected her. His words were still shards of glass embedded in her memory. I, Marcus Varick, reject Ilara of no line, for she is a blight upon this pack. Her weakness would poison my bloodline. Her cursed white coat is an insult to the moon goddess. I will not be shackled to a ghost. The pack had howled in agreement. Not a single voice had spoken for her, not her alpha, who saw her as a burden, nor the pack elders who had watched her grow up. They had simply watched as her world crumbled, as the phantom pain of a severed bond that never had the chance to form tore through her. Then they had cast her out, exile. A death sentence in the heart of the harshest winter in memory, made worse by the great fire that now consumed the northern territories. She stumbled, her worn boots sinking into a drift of ashen snow. Hunger was a dull, constant ache in her belly, a gnawing beast that had long since devoured her strength. She was so tired. It would be easy, she thought, to simply lie down, to let the cold take her, to become one with the white snow, a final, fitting disappearance. What was the point of fighting? She was broken, a flawed piece of pottery discarded by its maker. Lyra whined again, a desperate push against her consciousness. Forward. We must go forward. Her wolf spirit, though faint, had more fight in it than she did. Ilara didn't know why. What were they even moving toward? More emptiness? More pain? There was nothing for them out here. Nothing for them anywhere. The smell of blood cut through the smoke. It was sharp, metallic, and fresh. Instinct, buried deep beneath layers of hopelessness, flared to life. Danger. Her head snapped up, her pale red eyes scanning the charred landscape. Rogues? Scavengers? Either would mean a swift, brutal end. A part of her almost welcomed it, but the scent was different. It wasn't just the coppery tang of a fresh kill. It was potent, overwhelmingly so. It smelled of power, of ancient lineage, of something so profoundly alpha that it made the very air hum. It made Lyra shrink back in terror and awe. No rogue smelled like this. This was the scent of royalty, curiosity, a long-dormant emotion, stirred within her. Against her better judgment, she moved toward the source, her steps quiet and hesitant. She crept around a massive blackened oak, its branches twisted like arthritic fingers. And then she saw him. It was a wolf, a creature of impossible size, sprawled on the scorched earth. His fur, where it was not matted with blood and soot, was the purest silver white she had ever seen, shimmering even in the dim, smoky light. He was a creature of myth, a winter spirit caught in a hell of fire and ash. His flank was a mess of torn flesh, a deep, vicious wound that looked like it had been carved by multiple attackers. A heavy, silver-tipped arrow was embedded deep in his shoulder, its cruel head likely laced with wolfsbane to bring down a creature of his stature. His breath came in shallow, ragged pants. He was dying. Ilara froze. Her first instinct, born of a lifetime of fear, was to run. A wolf that powerful, even wounded, was a threat. His pack would be nearby, and they would not take kindly to a lone, cursed Omega near their fallen leader. But his pack was nowhere to be found. He was alone, utterly and completely alone, just like her. A tremor of empathy, sharp and painful, shot through her. She knew that kind of loneliness. The feeling of bleeding out while the world remained indifferent. She looked at his magnificent form, the raw power that clung to him even on the brink of death, and she saw not a monster, but a life being unjustly extinguished. "Leave him," her fear screamed. "Save yourself. You have nothing to give." But Lyra whimpered, a soft, mournful sound. "Help him. He is in pain." She looked at her own hands, chapped and thin. She had no food, no water, only a small, threadbare blanket in her pack, and a tiny flask of healing salve her mother had taught her to make years ago, a pitiful amount that would be like using a single drop of water to fight this inferno. It was not enough. She was not enough. The great wolf stirred, a low groan escaping his throat. His eyes fluttered open for a moment. They were the color of a frozen sky, a startling, electric blue that seemed to hold the fury of 1,000 storms. For a single, heart-stopping second, they met hers. There was no aggression in them, only agony, and then they slid shut once more. That single look broke something inside her. The ice that had encased her heart for so long cracked. What did it matter if she died here? What did it matter if she used her last ounce of strength? Her life was already over, thrown away by those who were meant to protect her. But his life felt like it mattered. It felt like the world would be a lesser place without him in it. "Okay," she whispered to the uncaring forest, her voice hoarse. "Okay, Lyra, we'll try." Making the decision was one thing, acting on it was another. He was colossal. She was barely 100 pounds, starved and weak. Moving him seemed an impossible task, but the fire, though distant, was creeping closer, its hungry glow painting the undersides of the smoke clouds a hellish red. The air was growing hotter. Leaving him here meant he would burn. She unstrapped the thin blanket from her pack. It was a pathetic tool, but it was all she had. With trembling fingers, she managed to work it under his massive head and shoulders. She braced her feet against a root, her muscles screaming in protest, and pulled. He barely moved. It was like trying to move a mountain. Tears of frustration and weakness welled in her eyes. "Please," she begged, not sure if she was talking to him, to the moon goddess who had abandoned her, or to herself. "Please, just help me." She tried again, pouring every last bit of her desperate energy into this effort. Lyra added her own feeble strength to the pull, a phantom surge of will. The great wolf shifted, an inch, then another. It was agonizing, back-breaking work. She dragged him through the soot and snow, away from the encroaching heat, foot by painful foot. The sharp edges of charred branches tore at her clothes and skin. Her lungs burned with every gasp. She found a small hollow, a shallow ravine sheltered by a series of large, unburnt rocks that formed a natural windbreak. It was colder here, but it was safer. It would have to do. It took what felt like an eternity of sweat and tears and muttered prayers, but she finally got him into the relative safety of the hollow. She collapsed beside him, her body shaking uncontrollably from exertion. For a long moment, she could only lie there, listening to the twin sounds of her own ragged breathing and his shallow, failing gasps. The cold was already seeping back into her bones. She had to move. She had to help him. With clumsy, numb fingers, she retrieved the small tin of salve. It was a blend of comfrey and yarrow, good for closing wounds and fighting infection, but it was meant for minor cuts, not for a wound that had torn through muscle and sinew. Still, it was better than nothing. "This is going to hurt," she whispered, her voice soft and shaky. "I'm sorry." She had to deal with the arrow first. The silver tip was the real poison. Gritting her teeth, she gripped the shaft. It was slick with his blood. She pulled, but it was lodged deep in the muscle and bone of his shoulder. He let out a pained roar, a sound so powerful it vibrated through the ground, and for a second, she was terrified he would lash out, that his instincts would take over and he would kill her. But he didn't move. He was too weak. "I'm sorry, I'm so sorry," she chanted, tears streaming down her face, freezing on her cheeks. "I have to." She braced one foot against his side, took a deep breath, and yanked with all her might. The arrow came free with a sickening squelch of flesh and a fresh torrent of dark blood. He convulsed, a silent scream of agony shaking his massive frame. Alara quickly pressed her hands to the new wound, trying to staunch the bleeding, her small hands looking utterly inadequate against his sheer size. Once the bleeding slowed to a sluggish ooze, she gently, carefully, began to clean the larger wound on his flank. She used snow to wash away the soot and grime, her touch as light as she could make it. He flinched with every contact, but he remained still. It was as if some part of him knew she was trying to help. She applied the salve, her fingers tracing the edges of the horrific injury. It was so little. It felt useless. Despair washed over her again. What was she doing? She was an Omega, a healer of scraped knees and minor ailments. She was not equipped for this. She was failing him. As she worked, she began to talk to him, the words spilling out of her in a hushed, broken stream. It was easier than facing the silence. "I don't know why I'm doing this," she confessed to his unconscious form. "I have nothing left. My pack, they threw me away, because I look like this." She touched a strand of her own white hair. "They called me a curse. Maybe I am. Maybe I'm just bringing my bad luck to you." She paused, her hand hovering over his magnificent coat. "You're beautiful," she whispered. "Your fur, it's like spun moonlight. They would never call you cursed. They would call you blessed. It's funny, isn't it? How the same color can be a blessing on one and a curse on another." Night fell completely, and the temperature plummeted. The glow of the fire was a constant, ominous pulse on the horizon. Shivering, Alara knew she had to do more. The cold would kill him as surely as his wounds. She built a small wall of snow and rock to further block the wind. Then she lay down beside him, curling her small body against his. He was losing heat rapidly. His fur was cold to the touch. With a heavy heart, she knew what she had to do. It was a desperate, forbidden magic, something Omegas were warned against. Sharing her life force. For a wolf as weak as Lyra, it could be a death sentence. But if she did nothing, he would die anyway. She placed her palm flat against his chest, right over his slowly beating heart. She closed her eyes, shutting out the dying forest and her own fear. She reached deep inside herself, past the pain and the loneliness, and found the tiny, flickering flame of her own life energy. It was small and fragile, but it was warm. "Lyra, we have to share," she thought, directing her will. We have to give him some of our warmth." Her wolf resisted for a moment, whimpering in protest. This was suicide. But then, a sense of resignation, of trust in her, flowed back. Together they pushed. She felt the warmth leave her body, a slow, draining river flowing from her palm into the massive wolf beside her. It was an agonizingly slow process, like bleeding out her very soul. The world started to go gray at the edges. A profound, bone-deep exhaustion settled over her, heavier than any fatigue she had ever known. "Just a little longer," she murmured, her words slurring. "Just stay alive. Please, just stay alive. No one should have to die alone out here." She felt his heartbeat steady, just slightly. A faint warmth began to radiate from his body, pushing back against the encroaching cold. It was working, but the cost was immense. Her vision blurred, and the darkness began to close in. Her last conscious thought was of the wolf's electric blue eyes, a tiny spark of hope in an endless, cold night. Then she knew no more. Elara awoke to the sound of voices. They were deep, urgent, and laced with authority. She was lying on something soft, but she was still cold, a deep, cellular cold that felt as if it had settled in her bones. Her body ached with a weariness that went beyond muscle. It was the ache of a soul stretched too thin. She cracked her eyes open. The world was a blur of gray and white. Several large figures stood in the hollow, their silhouettes dark against the pale morning sky. They were massive, radiating the same kind of power she had sensed from the white wolf, but lesser, like moons orbiting a Sunday. They were all focused on the spot where she had left him. Panic seized her. They had found him, his pack. They would kill her for daring to touch him. She tried to scramble away, but her limbs felt like lead. A weak, pathetic sound escaped her throat. One of the figures turned, his head snapping in her direction. His eyes, a sharp amber, widened in surprise. "Commander," he said, his voice a low rumble. "There is an Omega here." Another man, even larger and clearly the one in charge, turned to face her. He wore armor of black leather and silver, and his face was a mask of grim concern. He took a step toward her, and she flinched, trying to make herself smaller. "She is the one," a third voice said, softer but filled with awe. "Look, she lies on the king's cloak, and the arrow, it is beside her." "King?" the word echoed in her foggy brain. "King?" They couldn't mean. The commander knelt beside her, his movements careful, as if approaching a frightened animal. "Easy, little one," he said, his voice surprisingly gentle. "We are not going to harm you. Can you tell me what happened here? We have been tracking our king for 2 days." Elara could only stare, her mind struggling to connect the pieces. The magnificent white wolf, the scent of royalty, the king. The realization crashed down on her with the force of an avalanche. She hadn't just saved a wolf, she had saved a king, the Alpha King. Before she could form a single word, a movement from the center of the hollow drew everyone's attention. A low groan echoed off the rocks. The commander and his men, who she now realized were a royal guard, immediately snapped to attention, their bodies forming a protective circle. And then he rose. But it was not a wolf that stood up. It was a man. He was tall, impossibly so, with broad shoulders and a powerful build that even his torn and bloodied clothes could not conceal. His hair was the same color as his wolf's fur, a stunning, shocking silver white that fell to his shoulders. As he turned his head, his profile was sharp and aristocratic, a face born to command. And then he opened his eyes. They were the same electric blue she remembered, blazing with an intensity that stole her breath. He surveyed his guards, his gaze sharp and assessing, before it landed on her. He froze. The world seemed to fall silent. The air crackled with a sudden palpable energy, a force that hummed against her skin and made the hair on her arms stand on end. His stunning blue eyes widened, and a look of profound, utter shock crossed his regal features. He took a step toward her, then another, his movements filled with a strange, magnetic reverence. His guards watched, bewildered. "Your Majesty?" the commander asked, his voice hesitant. The king did not seem to hear him. His entire universe had narrowed to the small, shivering Omega huddled on his cloak. He knelt before her, his height making the gesture all the more staggering. He reached out a hand, his long, calloused fingers, hesitating just before they touched her cheek. "You," he breathed, his voice a deep, resonant baritone that vibrated through her very core. It was a sound of disbelief, of wonder, of a prayer answered after 1,000 years of silence. Elara stared at him, terrified and mesmerized. What was happening? Why was he looking at her like that? Like she was something precious, something he had been searching for his entire life. "It was you," he said again, his voice cracking with emotion. "You saved me." He looked from her face to the discarded arrow to the calder, small, empty tin of salve, to the faint traces of blood on her hands. His eyes softened with a dawning, fierce understanding. "You pulled me from the fire. You tended my wounds. You gave me your warmth." He touched his own chest, a look of awe on his face. "I felt it, even in the darkness. A tiny, brave flame keeping me alive." His gaze returned to her, and the raw power in his eyes was replaced by something else, something so tender and protective that it made her heart ache. "Mine," he whispered, the word a solemn vow. The single word hung in the air, electric and irrefutable. Elara's mind went blank. Mine? What did he mean, mine? It was the word, a wolf, used to claim something, an object, a piece of territory, a mate. The last thought was so absurd, so impossible that she almost laughed, a hysterical, broken sound. Her? His mate? The Alpha King, a being of immense power and majesty, and her, the cursed Omega, the packless, worthless outcast. The moon, goddess would have to be mad. "No!" she stammered, the word barely a puff of air. She tried to pull away, but his presence was like a gravity well, holding her in place. "You're mistaken. I'm nobody." His guards exchanged confused, shocked glances. The commander, a man named Garrus, took a hesitant step forward. "Your Majesty, perhaps the wolfsbane has clouded your mind." The king, KL, didn't even look at him. He silenced his second in command with a subtle, almost imperceptible lift of his hand. His entire focus remained locked on Elara, his blue eyes searching hers, delving past the fear and into the shattered core of her. "The goddess makes no mistakes," Kale said, his voice soft but absolute, intended only for her. "I have been searching for you for over a century. I have walked every territory, met every pack, and felt nothing. My wolf has been silent until last night." He gently took her hand, his thumb stroking over her pulse point. A jolt, like a tiny spark of lightning, shot up her arm. "When I was on the brink of death, bleeding out in a cursed forest, I felt it. The pull. Faint, but there. A silver thread in the darkness, leading me back. It was you." Tears welled in her eyes, hot and shameful. He didn't understand. He couldn't possibly know what she was. "You're wrong," she insisted, her voice trembling. She pulled her hand back as if burned. I am nothing. I am a flaw. My own pack threw me away. I am an albino, a weak omega with a weaker wolf. I am broken. I cannot be your mate. I cannot be a queen. The word queen felt alien on her tongue, a title from a fairy tale that had no place in her nightmare of a life. The very idea was a cruel joke. Queens were strong, beautiful, revered. She was small, pale, and despised. Kyle's expression hardened, but the anger was not directed at her. It was a cold, lethal fury aimed at the world that had hurt her. The fools who cast you out did not see your worth, but that does not mean it isn't there, he said, his voice deepening into a low growl of protective rage. They saw a pale coat and called it a curse. I see the heart of a true Luna. You, who had nothing, gave me everything you had. You risked your own life for a stranger. You showed more strength and compassion in one night than most alphas show in a lifetime. That is not weakness. That is the very definition of a queen. His words were like a balm on wounds she hadn't even known were still bleeding. For a moment, a tiny, treacherous seed of hope began to sprout in the barren wasteland of her heart. Could it be true? Could he really see something in her other than a flaw? But then the years of scorn, the ingrained belief in her own worthlessness, rose up like a tidal wave, drowning it. It was a mistake, a trick of the poison, or a delusion brought on by his near-death experience. He would realize his error soon enough, and then the rejection would come. A rejection from an alpha king would not just break her spirit, it would annihilate her. She couldn't survive that. Please, she whispered, her gaze dropping to the ground. Don't do this. Don't give me a hope that isn't real. Seeing the profound, unshakable despair in her, Kyle's strategy shifted. He stood up, his regal height casting a long shadow. He turned to his guards, his face now a mask of pure, undisputed authority. His voice boomed through the silent hollow, leaving no room for argument. Hear me, my silver guard, he declared. This Omega, Elara, is my fated mate, the future queen of all territories. She saved my life when I was left for dead. From this moment forward, she is under my protection. You will show her the same respect and loyalty you show me. Her word is my word. An insult to her is an insult to me. A threat to her is a declaration of war against my throne. Is that understood? Yes, Your Majesty. The response was instantaneous, a chorus of deep, loyal voices. His men, though clearly still reeling from the shock, snapped into perfect formation, their heads bowed in deference, not to him, but to her. Elara stared at them, her heart pounding in her chest. These warriors, the most elite fighters in the world, were bowing to her. The world had tilted on its axis. It was too much. The shock, the exhaustion, the emotional whiplash, it all came crashing down. The edges of her vision swam with black spots, and the ground rushed up to meet her. Kale moved with preternatural speed, catching her before she hit the ground. He swept her up into his arms as if she weighed nothing. She felt the solid, warm strength of his chest against her cheek, the steady, reassuring beat of his heart. It felt safe, safer than she had ever felt in her entire life. She is exhausted, Kael said to Garrus, his voice now a low, worried murmur. She gave too much of herself to save me. We are returning to the Slyke Palace immediately. Send word ahead. Have the royal healers prepare the Queen's chambers. At once, Your Majesty, Garrus replied, already turning to dispatch one of his men. As Kael held her, cradling her against his body, he began to walk. His stride was long and sure, and with every step he took, He carried her further away from the dead forest and the ashes of her old life. She was too weak to protest, too overwhelmed to think. She could only lie there, wrapped in the king's cloak, held in the king's arms, listening to the powerful rhythm of his heart. For the first time in her memory, she wasn't cold. A deep, penetrating warmth was spreading through her, a warmth that came not just from his body, but from his very presence. It felt like the first rays of sun after a winter that had lasted a lifetime, and despite every instinct telling her to fear it, she found herself leaning into it, a broken, frozen thing finally beginning to thaw. The journey to the palace was a blur. Ilara drifted in and out of consciousness, cocooned in a state of surreal detachment. One moment she was aware of the rhythmic movement of Kyle's powerful strides. The next she was lost in a dreamless dark. When she finally awoke fully, it was to a silence so profound it was almost jarring. She was lying in a bed, but that word was an insult to what she occupied. It was an ocean of softness, a cloud of silk sheets and downy pillows that seemed to cradle every aching part of her. Sunlight, warm and golden, streamed through a towering arched window, illuminating a room larger than her entire PAX meeting hall. The walls were hung with rich tapestries, the floors covered in plush carpets, and the furniture was carved from a dark, gleaming wood and inlaid with silver. It was a place of breathtaking luxury, a sanctuary of impossible beauty. Panic, cold and sharp, pierced through her awe. This was wrong. She didn't belong here. This was the queen's chamber, he had said. A place for a goddess, not a ghost. She sat up, the silk sheets pooling around her waist. She was dressed in a simple, soft linen nightgown, and her skin was clean. Someone had tended to her. A gentle knock sounded at the door before it swung open. An older woman with kind eyes and hair streaked with gray entered, carrying a silver tray. She wore the uniform of the palace staff, but she carried herself with an air of quiet dignity. She smiled warmly when she saw Ilara was awake. "Good morning, Luna," the woman said, her voice soft as velvet. She set the tray on a small table near the bed. It was laden with food, warm bread, fresh fruit, cheese, and a steaming pot of fragrant tea. The aroma alone made Ilara's stomach clench with a hunger so fierce it was painful. "Luna?" Ilara whispered, the title feeling foreign and heavy. "That is what you are," the woman said simply. "My name is Helen. I am the head of the household staff. The king ordered that you were not to be disturbed, but he also ordered that food be ready for the moment you woke. He said you would be hungry." The simple act of consideration, the thought that he had anticipated her needs, was so foreign that it brought tears to her eyes. No one had ever thought of her needs. She had always been an afterthought, a problem to be managed. "Thank you," she managed to say, her voice thick. Helen just nodded, her kind eyes full of an unasked question. "The king is waiting for you. When you are ready, there is a bathing room through that door. We have laid out some clothes for you. Take your time. He will not rush you." With another small bow, she left, closing the door softly behind her. Ilara ate. She ate with a desperation that shamed her, but she couldn't stop. Each bite was an explosion of flavor, a confirmation that she was alive, that she was safe. After she had eaten her fill, she followed Helen's instructions and found the bathing room. It was a chamber of marble and steam, with a tub deep enough to swim in. The warm water soothed her bruised body and weary soul. The clothes laid out for her were simple but exquisitely made, a soft wool dress the color of a winter sky that perfectly matched Kale's eyes. It fit as if it had been made for her. As she looked at her reflection in the silver-framed mirror, she saw a stranger. The grime and fear were gone, but the girl staring back was still pale, still too thin, her red eyes still wide with uncertainty. Could this girl truly be a queen? It seemed impossible. Taking a deep breath, she left the chambers. A guard, one of the men from the forest, stood silently by the door. He immediately bowed his head as she appeared. "Luna, the king awaits you in the solar." He led her through endless, beautiful corridors. Everything was built on a grand scale, designed to awe, to proclaim the power of the one who ruled here. Yet it wasn't cold or sterile. Sunlight flooded every space, and the air was filled with the scent of beeswax and drying herbs. It felt like a home. The solar was a circular room at the top of a tower, its walls made almost entirely of glass, offering a panoramic view of the kingdom. Snow-capped mountains pierced the sky in the distance, and a vibrant, sprawling city was nestled in the valley below. Kyle stood in the center of the room, looking out at his domain. He had changed into a simple black tunic and trousers, but nothing could diminish his regal aura. He turned as she entered, and a slow, gentle smile touched his lips. It transformed his face, chasing away the stern lines of a king and revealing the man beneath. "You look well rested," he said, his voice a low, pleasant rumble. "I am. Thank you," she said, her hands twisting in the fabric of her dress. For everything, the room, the food. It is the least I could do for the woman who saved my life," he replied, his blue eyes warm. "Come, stand with me." She hesitated then, slowly walked to his side, her gaze drawn to the breathtaking view. "It's beautiful," she whispered. "It is my responsibility," he said, "to protect all of this, to ensure my people are safe and prosperous. It is a lonely duty." He looked at her then, his expression serious. "Alara, I know this is overwhelming. I know what I said in the forest must seem like a madman's raving, but it is the truth. The bond between us is real. I feel it like a second heartbeat in my chest. Can you not feel it too?" She did. She had been trying to deny it, to dismiss it as fear or gratitude, but it was there. A faint silvery hum deep within her, a quiet pull toward him that had nothing to do with his title or his power. It was a feeling of recognition, as if her soul had been waiting for his her entire life without her even knowing it. I feel something," she admitted, her voice barely audible. "But I don't understand. How can I be your mate? I am not worthy of this." She gestured to the palace, the kingdom to him. "I will only bring you shame. People will see me, and they will say what my old pack said, that I am a curse. Let them," Kale said, his voice hardening with conviction. "Their words are meaningless. Their blindness is their own failing, not yours. What you see as a flaw, Alara, is your greatest gift. It is a mark of purity, of a lineage so ancient and powerful that it has nearly been forgotten." She stared at him, confused. "What do you mean?" "My own bloodline, the first line of kings, were all born with white fur and eyes of ice. It was a sign of our direct connection to the moon's spirit, a mark of ultimate power. But over the centuries, as our blood mixed with other lines, it faded. It became a rarity, then a legend. Lesser wolves, fearful of what they could not understand, began to twist the legend. They turned a blessing into a curse. They taught their pups to fear what was different, to scorn what was rare. He reached up and gently touched a lock of her white hair, his touch sending a shiver through her. "Your coloring is not a flaw. It is a sign that the old blood runs true and strong in you. You are not a ghost, Alara. You are royalty. You just never knew it." The revelation was staggering. Everything she had been taught, everything she had believed about herself, was a lie born of fear and ignorance. She was not a curse, she was a legacy, but still, the doubt lingered, a poison that had seeped too deep. But my wolf is weak. Lyra is small. She is not weak, Kale interrupted gently. She is dormant. And Omega's wolf reflects their spirit and their place in the pack. Yours was crushed, starved of acceptance and love. She was forced to retreat, to make herself small to survive. But she is in there, Alara, a queen's spirit, waiting to be acknowledged. When you accept our bond, when you accept your place by my side, she will heal. She will become the wolf she was always meant to be. He was dismantling her walls, brick by painful brick. He was taking every broken piece of her and telling her it was not broken at all, just misunderstood. It was too much to hope for, and yet she wanted to believe him more than she had ever wanted anything. I am not asking you to become a queen overnight, he continued, sensing her inner turmoil. I am not demanding you accept this bond this instant. I am asking you to stay, to give me a chance to prove to you that what I say is true. Let me show you that you are not worthless. Let me show you what it feels like to be cherished. The choice will always be yours. I will never force you. His patience, his understanding, was the most powerful weapon he possessed. It disarmed her completely, a forced claim she could have fought against, a command she could have rebelled against. But this gentle kindness, this offer of a choice she had never been given in her life, it left her defenseless. For weeks, he was true to his word. He gave her space, but he was never far. He invited her to walk with him in the palace gardens, where winter roses bloomed in defiance of the snow. He ate his meals with her, not in the grand dining hall, but in a small, cozy study, asking about her life, listening with an intensity that made her feel seen for the first time. He showed her the royal library, a vast repository of werewolf history, and pointed out the ancient texts that spoke of the legendary white wolves. Slowly, cautiously, the ice around Alara's heart began to melt. The constant fear that had been her companion for so long began to recede, replaced by a tentative sense of peace. The palace staff treated her with a quiet reverence that she found baffling but also deeply healing. No one sneered at her. No one whispered behind her back. Here, in the heart of the most powerful kingdom in the world, she was simply accepted. Her wolf, Lyra, began to stir. The heart, pathetic, whimpering creature inside her started to gain strength. She could feel a new warmth spreading through her, a nascent power that was directly tied to Kale's presence. The bond between them was growing stronger every day, a silent silver cord weaving their souls together. But her fear was a stubborn, deep-rooted weed. The voice of Marcus, of her old alpha, still echoed in her mind on her darkest nights, a blight, a curse, worthless. She was terrified that this was all a fragile dream, and that any day she would wake up back in the cold, alone. She was afraid to fully trust this happiness, because the fall would be too great to survive. She didn't know that her past was racing toward her, and that the final test of her newfound strength was about to begin. The summons came on a crisp, clear morning. A delegation from the Blood Moon Pack, her former home, had requested an audience with the Alpha King. Kale's face was unreadable as he informed her, his voice carefully neutral. "It is a standard territorial tribute," he explained, standing by the fireplace in their study. Alpha Valerius and his beta are coming to reaffirm their loyalty and pay their yearly tithe. You do not have to be there. The names hit her like a physical blow. Alpha Valerius, the man who had exiled her without a second thought, and his beta, Marcus, the man who had shattered her. The blood drained from her face, and the familiar icy grip of fear coiled in her stomach. Hide! The instinct was overwhelming. She had to hide. They could not see her here. They would laugh. They would mock her. They would tell the king what she really was, and he would finally see his mistake. I think I will stay in my rooms, she stammered, her gaze fixed on the floor. Cale was silent for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was soft, but laced with a steel she was beginning to recognize. Alara, look at me. She reluctantly lifted her head. His blue eyes were intense, searching. You are not the same girl they cast out into the snow, he said. You are the future queen of this kingdom. There is no shame in you. The shame belongs to them. But, he added, his expression softening, I will not force you. The choice is yours. She wanted to run. Every broken part of her screamed to flee back to the safety of her chambers and bolt the door. But then she looked at Cale. She saw the quiet confidence in his eyes, the unwavering belief he had in her. He wasn't just offering her a choice, he was offering her a chance. A chance to face the ghosts of her past, not as a victim but with him at her side. And what of Lyra? Inside her, her wolf was not cowering. For the first time, she felt a spark of fury from her other half. A low, protective growl rumbled deep in her soul. They had hurt her. They had hurt them. They had left them to die. Lyra did not want to hide. Lyra wanted to face them, drawing strength from her wolf's unexpected anger and Kyle's steady presence. Alara straightened her shoulders. Her voice was still a little shaky, but it held a new resolve. No, she said, meeting his gaze. I will be there. I will stand with you. A slow, proud smile spread across Cale's face. Good, he said simply. He held out his hand. Then let us go greet our guests. She placed her trembling hand in his. His grip was warm and firm, a solid anchor in the storm of her anxiety. The throne room was an immense, cavernous hall, designed to intimidate. 2 massive thrones, carved from obsidian and silver, sat on a raised dais at the far end. Sunlight streamed through high, stained-glass windows, painting the marble floor in jewels of light. Kyle led her to the dais, seating himself on the larger, more ornate king's throne. He then gestured to the one beside it, the queen's throne. It was slightly smaller, but no less magnificent. She hesitated. She had never dared to even approach it. It felt like a sacrilege. That is your seat, Ilara, Cale said, his voice echoing slightly in the vast hall. Take it. With her heart pounding, Saturday. The cold silver felt foreign against her back. But sitting beside him, looking out over the empty hall, she felt a flicker of something she had never felt before. Power. The great doors at the end of the hall swung open, and the Blood Moon delegation entered. Alpha Valerius was in the lead, a large, blustering man with a perpetually stern expression. And walking just behind him, his head held high with an arrogant tilt, was Marcus. Alara's breath caught in her throat. He looked exactly the same handsome face, the same cruel curl to his lip. When his eyes scanned the throne room, they were filled with a mixture of awe and resentment. They passed over her at first, dismissing her as a pale servant or a decoration. His focus, and Valerius's, was entirely on the formidable figure of the Alpha King. They stopped at the foot of the dais and bowed low, a gesture of deep submission. Alpha King Cale, Valerius boomed, his voice attempting to project strength, but failing to hide his nervousness. It is an honor to be in your presence. I am Alpha Valerius of the Blood Moon Pack, and this is my beta, Marcus Varick. I know who you are. Cale's voice was dangerously calm, as cold and sharp as a shard of ice. He did not invite them to rise. He let them remain bowed, a clear display of dominance. Marcus, ever impatient, chanced to glance upward. His gaze swept past Cale, and finally, properly, landed on her. His eyes widened. A flicker of confusion, then disbelief, then utter shock crossed his face. He straightened up slightly, forgetting his posture of submission. "Alara?" he breathed, his voice a mixture of astonishment and contempt. "What are you doing here? Are you a servant in the king's palace now? I suppose even a royal floor is a step up from a ditch in the woods." A collective gasp went through the royal guards lining the hall. An insult of that magnitude, delivered to a person sitting beside the king, was unthinkable. Alpha Valerius went pale, realizing his beta's catastrophic mistake. Alara flinched as if he had struck her. The old pain, the familiar shame, washed over her. She felt herself shrink into the throne, wanting the shadows to swallow her whole. But then she felt Cale's hand cover hers, where it rested on the arm of the throne. His touch was a jolt of warmth, of strength. He didn't look at her. His gaze was fixed on Marcus, and his electric blue eyes had gone glacial. The temperature in the room seemed to drop by 20 degrees. A wave of pure, unadulterated power rolled off him, pressing down on the two men from Blood Moon. It was a physical force, an alpha command of such magnitude that it buckled their knees. Both Valerius and Marcus choked, their bodies forced back down into a deeper, more painful bow, their faces nearly pressed to the marble floor. "You will address the queen with respect." Cale's voice was no longer calm. It was a low, terrifying growl, the sound of a predator about to tear out the throat of its prey. The very walls seemed to vibrate with his fury. Marcus grunted, struggling against the invisible pressure. "Queen?" he choked out, his voice filled with incredulous laughter. "Her? You can't be serious. She is a worthless, cursed omega, a pale blight we cast from our pack to strengthen it. She is nothing." Every word was a hammer blow to Alara's fragile confidence. Tears blurred her vision. He was right. She was nothing. What was she doing here? This was all a horrible mistake. And then Cale stood up. The full, terrifying force of his rage was unleashed. It was not just pressure now. It was a physical assault of pure will. Marcus cried out in pain as he was slammed flat against the floor, unable to move, barely able to breathe. Alpha Valerius trembled violently, but Cale's focus was entirely on the beta. Cale descended the steps of the dais, his movements slow, deliberate, and utterly menacing. He stopped beside the pathetic, groveling form of the man who had broken his mate. "You cast out a diamond because you were too ignorant to see its worth," Cale snarled, his voice dripping with contempt. "You had a queen in your midst, a soul of such profound compassion and strength that she is destined to rule by my side, and you threw her away for being different. You speak of strength? You, who left a member of your own pack to die in a blizzard, have no concept of the meaning of the word." He crouched down, grabbing a handful of Marcus's hair and yanking his head up so their eyes were level. Marcus whimpered, his arrogance completely stripped away, leaving only raw terror. "This nothing," Cale growled, his gaze flicking to Alara for a split second, filled with a fierce possessive fire, "found me half dead, torn apart by rogues and poisoned with silver. She dragged me, a wolf twice her size, through a burning forest to safety. She used her last bit of strength to heal me. She shielded my body from the cold with her own, giving me her life force when she had none to spare. She showed more courage and loyalty in a single night than you have shown in your entire pathetic, power-hungry life." He shoved Marcus's face back against the floor, She is not a curse. She is my mate, my fated, my queen. And you, he finished, his voice dropping to a deadly whisper, are the fool who threw away the moon and the stars because you were afraid of the night. He stood and returned to the dais, his fury still rolling off him in palpable waves. He looked down at the terrified Alpha Valerius. Your pack is on probation. Your tribute is doubled for the next 10 years as penance for your idiocy. And your beta is a disgrace. Strip him of his rank. He will live out his days as the lowest omega. He will learn what it is to be scorned. Perhaps then he will learn humility. Or perhaps he will simply break. I do not care which. Valerius, shaking, could only stammer, Yes, Alpha King, as you command. Now get out of my sight, Kale commanded. Before I decide that your entire pack is not worth the ground it stands on. Valerius scrambled to his feet and practically dragged the whimpering, broken form of Marcus from the throne room. The great doors boomed shut behind them, leaving a ringing silence. The entire confrontation had lasted only a few minutes, but it had changed everything. Alara sat on her throne, tears streaming down her face, but they were not tears of shame or pain. They were tears of catharsis, tears of relief. Every cruel word, every whispered insult, every moment of humiliation she had ever endured had just been answered and annihilated by the fury of a king. He hadn't just defended her, he had championed her. He had taken her greatest perceived weakness, her compassion, and declared it to be her ultimate strength. He turned to her, the rage instantly melting from his face, replaced by a gentle concern. He knelt before her throne, taking both of her hands in his. "Are you all right?" he asked softly. She could only nod, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. She looked at him, truly looked at him, and for the first time, she saw not just a king, or a protector, or a fated mate. She saw her other half, the one who saw her, the real her, and found her worthy. The last of the ice around her heart didn't just melt, it shattered into a million pieces, washed away by the warmth of her tears. The doubt, the fear, the ingrained worthlessness, it was all gone, burned to ash in the fire of his devotion. "He called me nothing," she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. "And he was wrong," Kale said, his voice firm and absolute. He lifted her hand to his lips and kissed her knuckles. "You are my everything." In that moment, everything clicked into place. The bond between them, that silver cord, flared into a brilliant, blinding light. It was no longer a quiet hum. It was a symphony. She felt a surge of power, of warmth, of pure, unconditional love flow from him into her, and she sent her own tentative, grateful love flowing back. Lyra, her long-dormant wolf, rose up within her, not as a small, shivering creature, but as a magnificent, powerful being of moonlight and spirit. She felt her wolf's strength join with hers, whole and complete for the first time. She was not broken. She had never been broken. She had just been waiting. "Kyle," she said, her voice clear and strong. She slid from the throne and knelt to face him, so they were equals. She cupped his face in her hands, her thumbs stroking his sharp cheekbones. "I accept this bond. I accept you. I choose you." The relief that washed over his face was profound. The lonely, century-old king disappeared, and in his place was a man who had finally found his home. A brilliant, joyous smile lit up his features. "And I choose you, Alara," he breathed. "Yesterday, today, and for all of my tomorrows." He leaned in and captured her lips with his. The kiss was not one of desperate passion, but of deep, soulful recognition. It was a promise. A homecoming. It tasted of wood smoke and winter, of safety and forever. It was fire and lightning, sealing the bond, sealing their fates together in a flash of brilliant, magical light. She felt his power settle in her, and her own dormant power rise to meet it. Two halves of a whole finally made one. When they broke apart, she was breathless. She rested her forehead against his, her pale red eyes looking into his sky-blue ones. The reflection she saw there was no longer a ghost or a curse. It was a queen. They stood together, hand in hand, and turned to face the empty throne room. But it no longer felt empty. It felt full of promise, of a future she had never dared to dream of. Her Thames journey had started in fire and ash, an outcast thrown away to die. But her supposed curse had led her to her destiny. Her rejection had been a brutal, painful, necessary detour on the path to her true home. Standing beside her king, her mate, her equal, she was no longer Alara the rejected. She was Alara, Luna Queen, of the combined territories. And she would use her strength, the compassion that had saved a king, to build a new world. A world where no one would ever be thrown away for being different. A world where every soul, no matter how small or pale, would know they were worthy of love. Her reign, their reign, had just begun.